Why keep driving that jalopy? You should junk it, they all say. You don't need that big contraption, you should buy a small coupe. They don't know the seat ain't vacant, they can't see her sitting there. They don't know the many secrets this old car and I can share. They never saw it new and shining, they never saw it poppy red. They never saw it in the churchyard on that happy day we wed. They don't know this old jalopy has become a part of me. Now she's gone, we'll hang together, tight as bark hangs to a tree. This jalopy climbed the mountains, crossed the desert gay with bloom, brought us safely to the ocean on our happy honeymoon. Later on that big old backseat held a cradle full of joy, twice a curly-headed daughter, then a bouncing baby boy. They never saw it new and shining, they never saw it poppy red. They never saw it in the churchyard on that happy day we wed. They don't know this old jalopy has become a part of me. Now she's gone, we'll hang together, tight as bark hangs to a tree. I still see the picnic baskets this old car held in its arms. Many times we drove to kinfolks far away on sleepy farms. I still hear the kids a-laughing in the backseat through the years. There were times this faded leather caught some mighty lonely tears. They never saw it new and shining, they never saw it poppy red. They never saw it in the churchyard on that happy day we wed. They don't know this old jalopy has become a part of me. Now she's gone, we'll hang together, tight as bark hangs to a tree.
sweet Betsy from Pike across the Wake Mountains with her lover Ike, with 2 yoke of oxen and 1 spotted hog, a tall Shanghai rooster and an old yeller dog. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. The Shanghai ran off and the oxen all died. That morning the last piece of bacon was fried. For I got discouraged, Betsy got mad, and the dog wagged his tail and looked wondrously sad. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. The wagon broke down with a terrible crash, and out on the prairie rolled all sorts of trash. A few little baby clothes done up with care looked a little suspicious, but all on the square. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. Yelling horde, and Betsy was scared they would scalp her adored. Behind the front wagon wheel Betsy did crawl. It was there she fought Injuns with musket and ball. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. They soon reached the desert where Betsy gave out, and down in the sand she lay rolling about, while Ike in great horror looked on with surprise. Said, Betsy, get up, you'll get sand in your eyes. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. Sweet Betsy got up with a great deal of pain, and she would go to Pike County again. But I gave a sigh and they fondly embraced. They traveled along with his arm round her waist. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today. They crossed the wide prairie, they climbed the high peaks, they camped in the mountains for weeks upon weeks. They fought with the Injuns with musket and ball. They reached California in spite of it all. Doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today, doodle-dang for to die, doodle-dang for today.
are. True, mind you, about the historic Death Valley country.
This is, of course, a most humbling moment for me. The story that'll be told inside the walls that are yet to be built here is the story not only of a presidency, but of a movement, a determined movement dedicated to the greatness of America and faith in its bedrock traditions, in the essential goodness of its people, in the essential soundness of its institutions, and yes, faith in our very essence as a nation. There was once upon a time that to be a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. But I remember the story of a fellow who was running for office as a Republican, and he was in a rural area and it wasn't known to be Republican, and he stopped by a farm to do some campaigning. And when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped and he said, "Wait right here till I go get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got her, and the candidate looked around for a podium from which to give his speech, and the only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. And at the end of it, the farmer said, "That's the first time I ever heard a Republican speech." And the candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform."
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
I am here to announce my intention to seek the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. Our government is too big and it spends too much. I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day. America's best days are yet to come. You ain't seen nothing yet. Is America better off than it was 4 years ago? We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
We will always remember. We will always be proud. We will always be prepared, so we may be always free.
March 30th, 1981.
Mr. President!
John Hinckley Jr. fires 6 shots at President Ronald Reagan. A bullet lodges an inch away from his heart. Reagan is rushed into the operating room and tells his doctors, "I hope you're all Republicans."
Presenting to you the President of the United States.
Our 40th president survived, of course. And besides his toughness, the shooting showed the American people that the great communicator also had quite a sense of humor.
Letter came from Peter Sweeney. He's in the 2nd grade in the Riverside School in Rockville Center. And he said, "I hope you get well quick, or you might have to make a speech in your pajamas."
Throughout his political career, Reagan used humor to win friends, influence voters,
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your
and slay the opposition. No one knew that better than Democratic challenger Walter Mondale.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience. You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it.
A former Hollywood actor and spokesman for General Electric, Reagan knew how to make his humor seem off the cuff, except that it wasn't.
Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but what the hell, let's move on to something else.
You know, you can talk to any number of President Reagan's speechwriters over the years, and when they might hand him a speech, sometimes the speeches would come back with a quote or an expression or a joke that they hadn't seen before.
Turns out the Gipper had a secret comedic weapon, says John Highbush, executive director of the Reagan Library. So all of this is the contents of his desk, the last desk he used.
2 boxes filled with the last objects sitting inside President Reagan's working desk.
Cool. All right, well, listen, I want to see this stuff. Buried inside one of these boxes, a stack of index cards.
The president's famous one-liners, his best jokes, written on both sides. You know, this is the humor of Ronald Reagan in 3x5.
This one is titled One-Liners. Adolescence is the time when children suddenly feel responsible for answering the phone. It's pretty good. It's funny. As unassuming as these look, they were political dynamite, a war chest of jokes. Many he wrote himself, others he borrowed.
Someone has once said that actually, as long as there are final exams, there will be prayer in schools.
I can remember when a hot story broke and the reporters would run in yelling, "Stop the chisels."
We showed some of the jokes to comedian Drew Carey. Jokes about Congress.
I've wondered at times what the 10 Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress.
About the Soviet Union.
What are the 4 things wrong with Soviet agriculture? Spring, summer, autumn, and winter.
And about himself.
Just to show you, this is the best one.
Just show you how youthful I am, I intend to campaign in all 13 states.
He was a guy who wasn't afraid to make fun of himself, which was great. You know, like whatever you think the elephant in the room is, that's the thing you should be able to talk about and joke about. When I do the same thing, the first thing I do is I make a joke about the way I look.
And that kind of inoculates yourself.
Totally.
When I go in for a physical now, they no longer ask me how old I am. They just carbon date me.
Reagan's sunny disposition, his ability to joke about pretty much anything, long predated his career in politics, says his daughter, Patty Davis. She says it was a lifelong coping mechanism.
I think that everything about my father goes back to the fact of him being the child of an alcoholic. He protected himself against the unpredictability of his home by developing this sort of coating of humor over everything. I don't want to feel the pain here. I don't want to feel the unpredictability here.
Mr. President, in talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you have blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.
At home, Davis also saw another side of her father's humor.
The reason that we made it a masked dance was
impersonating the distinctive, high-pitched voice of writer Truman Capote.
Idea of the domino black and white idea, but
so I'm trying to imagine Ronald Reagan imitating Truman Capote.
Yeah, and he wasn't doing it as a put down, but to me, because I was so idealistic, you know, I thought, oh, this could be, you know, it's like he's putting down, you know, a gay man or something. He really wasn't. He just thought it was funny.
Oh, and there's one more Reagan family joke. After that assassination attempt, the Gipper told Nancy, "Honey, I forgot to duck."
Welcome to the VOA Special English program, People in America. Today, Steve Ember and Rich Kleinfeld tell about American publisher William Randolph Hearst. Mr. Hearst created what was once the nation's largest newspaper organization. He bought newspapers in many areas of the United States. He spent millions of dollars to gain readers in sometimes shocking ways. He forever changed the American newspaper business.
William Randolph Hearst was born in San Francisco in 1863. He was the only child of George Hearst and Phoebe Apperson Hearst. His father became rich by developing mines. His mother was a philanthropist who gave her time and money to help others. William Randolph Hearst had everything he wanted as a child. But he was a rebel. In 1885, he was expelled from Harvard, one of the best universities in America, for playing a joke on a professor. George Hearst wanted his son to take control of developing the mines or the land he owned. But William had other desires. He became interested in newspapers while at Harvard. He started working as a reporter for the New York World newspaper, owned by Joseph Pulitzer.
George Hearst owned the San Francisco Examiner newspaper. But he was more interested in politics than in newspaper publishing. In 1887,
I thought this guy was high society, a heavy hitter, one of the 1% of people that we hear about today that have got all the money in America. Well, he was certainly one of those folks, but he didn't like high society. He didn't like people that looked down their nose at others because they weren't born into great wealth and power. Chef Dolly was his favorite chef. He was Filipino. Would it surprise you if I told you that William Randolph Hearst didn't have any servants? No servants. He only had employees. They were on staff. They had job descriptions. If you worked for Hearst, as an individual, you were respected regardless of your race. You were paid well. You ate the same food that the guests did. And as long as you did your job, you had a job. He loved the common man and woman.
George Hearst became a United States Senator. He gave control of the newspaper to his son William, who was 23. William Randolph Hearst wanted to create a newspaper that people would talk about. He worked long hours and put high energy into his newspaper. He employed some of the best reporters and writers he could find, and he paid them the highest wages. Mr. Hearst improved the appearance of his newspaper and bought modern equipment. He also improved relations with advertisers. Advertisers pay to have their products shown in newspapers to increase sales. Newspapers profit from the money paid by advertisers. News stories in the San Francisco Examiner were written with force, energy, and excitement. Some stories were written to shock readers and affect them emotionally. However, the stories were simple and easy to read. Mr. Hearst believed in doing whatever it took to get readers. His newspaper policy was, make the news complete, print all the news, shorten it if necessary, but get it in. That became the policy in newsrooms across America.
By 1891, the San Francisco Examiner had 3 times more readers and advertisers than when Mr. Hearst took control of the newspaper. In less than 5 years, William Randolph Hearst made the new San Francisco Examiner a huge success. Mr. Hearst repeated his success in New York City. He borrowed $5 million from his mother to purchase a second newspaper, the New York Journal. In his first 2 months, he increased the number of copies sold from 30,000 to 100,000. Joseph Pulitzer was a very successful publisher in New York. Mr. Hearst shared Mr. Pulitzer's excitement and energy about the newspaper business. During the 1890s, Mr. Hearst and Mr. Pulitzer began a fierce newspaper war. Mr. Hearst hired many reporters from Mr. Pulitzer's New York World newspaper. He paid them more than 2 times as much as they had been earning. He also reduced the price of his newspaper below Mr. Pulitzer's.
Mr. Hearst won readers by making the news more exciting and entertaining. He created a kind of newspaper reporting known today as yellow journalism. News events were made to seem greater than they really were. His methods went beyond what would be accepted today in major newspapers. Critics said his newspapers were only for entertainment. Yet many other newspapers tried to copy his methods. Mr. Hearst attacked big businesses and dishonest politicians in his newspapers. There were also reports about sex, murder, and other crimes. His newspapers became a voice for working people and the poor. His influence grew across the nation through his newspapers and the magazines he bought or began.
Many experts say Mr. Hearst's reporting methods and his battle with Mr. Pulitzer for readers led to the Spanish-American War. In 1898, the United States fought Spain to help the people of Cuba gain independence from Spain. Mr. Hearst's newspapers had accused Spain of sinking the American battleship Maine and killing 250 sailors. This increased public support for the war. However, it still is not known how the ship sank. The war greatly increased readers for the Hearst publications. Mr. Hearst's battle with competitors widened after the war. Some newspapers blamed him when President William McKinley was murdered in 1901. The assassination happened after one of the Hearst newspapers seemed to suggest killing Mr. McKinley.
In the early 1900s, William Randolph Hearst became deeply involved in politics. He represented New York in the United States House of Representatives from 1903 to 1907. In 1904, he unsuccessfully sought the Democratic nomination for president. He also failed in his campaigns to become governor of New York or mayor of New York City. Mr. Hearst had hoped to change the way things were being done in New York City. He hoped to defeat dishonest New York City politicians who controlled the city at the time. Mr. Hearst also campaigned against big business. He supported labor unions and government ownership of public utilities, railroads, and other big companies. And he sought political reform and the return of economic competition in the country.
Mr. Hearst's opponents accused him of being disloyal to his country because of his support for Germany during the first years of World War I. He was opposed to American involvement in the war. Mr. Hearst was sharply criticized for his political ideas. Many people refused to deal with him. Some hated him. His newspapers were banned in many communities. Mr. Hearst strongly supported Democrat Franklin Roosevelt for president in 1932. Then he became increasingly conservative and turned against President Roosevelt. He opposed American involvement in World War II. He also led a fierce campaign against communism during the 1930s. Through the years, Mr. Hearst continued to buy newspapers and magazines across the country and around the world. He also controlled a number of radio and television stations and a movie company.
William Randolph Hearst and his wife Millicent were married in 1903. They had 5 sons. She remained married to him until her death. However, Mr. Hearst spent almost 30 years of his life with Hollywood actress Marion Davies in San Simeon, California. They met in 1917 and later lived together at San Simeon. He started a movie company to produce movies for her. Their relationship shocked the nation. Mr. Hearst spent 30 years and $30 million to build a huge home at San Simeon. It has 165 rooms. Mr. Hearst and Marion Davies entertained many famous people there. He continually bought costly art objects to fill it. By 1937, Mr. Hearst's heavy spending threatened to ruin his publishing organization. He was forced to sell much of his property and many art objects. The economic recovery after World War II saved what was left of his media organization.
When William Randolph Hearst died in 1951, he still owned what was then the largest newspaper company in America. Today, the Hearst Corporation includes more than 130 separate businesses. They include newspapers, magazines, radio and television stations, and business media companies. The communications business William Randolph Hearst began continues to influence and inform people around the world.
This special English program was written by Cynthia Kirk. It was produced by Paul Thompson. Your narrators were Steve Ember and Rich Kleinfeld. I'm Faith Lapidus. Listen again next week for another People in America program on the Voice of America.
first thing you want to learn when you hit Alcatraz is keep your mouth shut, walk with your back to the wall.
The Alcatraz cell house opened as a federal prison in 1934. Within these walls lived the country's toughest, most dangerous, and most famous prisoners. Broadway was the first stop for arriving prisoners.
We went right down Broadway, in our birthday suits. And all the guys, howling.
Typical Alcatraz cell. Every one of them in the cell house exactly alike.
I had a middle tabletop and a little chair there, and that was about it. The cell was pretty barren.
5 feet wide, 9 feet long, and 7 feet high. And that's what I call a little box.
No decorations allowed. Anything, couldn't paste anything on the wall.
Waiting on the bed for each new prisoner was a copy of the official rules and regulations.
This is the rules of the cell house. Your cell is subject to search at any time.
Your towel had to be folded up and put on your shelf. Your toothbrush, and they used to give us tooth powder in little green containers.
I guess like a cockroach feels in a matchbox.
You may smoke in your cell in the library.
We were issued a pack of wings on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. Every inmate, whether he smoked or not.
Sweep your cell and place the trash in the trash bin.
I knew we marked everything in that cell.
And sweep your cell and place the trash in the trash bin.
I knew we marked everything in that cell. And pretty soon that cell became like a part of me, or I became a part of the cell. Alcatraz is always classed as the end of the line, the point of no return. It's like going into the ground. When you're buried, you're gone forever.
Prisoners had a decision to make, whether to obey the rules or not, to do good time or bad time. That decision affected their lives dramatically.
An inmate is given housing, good food, medical attention, and all the necessities of life.
Everything else was a privilege. Time to exercise outside, getting books and mail, all had to be earned. One of their favorite privileges was the recreation yard.
The most pleasant place, I believe, on Alcatraz, and the most appreciated. The handball court, the horseshoe court.
Prisoners also played bridge out in the yard. They used dominoes instead of cards.
They came out with a system called Auto Bridge. You played it all by yourself. Guys got so wound up in this bridge thing that they ate and slept it. They'd go out there and it would be so cold that you didn't think you could stay out there. Yet they'd stay out there for 3 hours and play bridge. And if you're occupied with bridge and you're studying bridge, you're not thinking about going over the wall.
Prisoners who chose not to behave ended up in a harsher place, isolation. D Block was the prison within Alcatraz, the treatment unit.
This place is going to operate on the basis that you do what you're told, and you're going to get a fair break. If you don't behave yourself, we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Unruly or violent prisoners were sent here. They stayed in their cells 24 hours a day. Typically, they were only allowed out once a week for a shower and exercise.
Now, in this cell block, we have 42 of the least popular cells in Alcatraz. Although by far they are the best, the roomiest, and the nicest state-of-the-art cells that were available in this prison.
It was cold. It was damp. The wind used to just blow through there. You could hear it. At night you could hear it whistling through the windows.
One of the more infamous prisoners to live here in D Block was convicted killer Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman.
And almost immediately upon his arrival at Alcatraz, he was relegated to the treatment unit. And he didn't bring his birds along with him, which made him very unhappy. But he brought all his bad habits with him, which made us unhappy.
This was solitary confinement, the whole, cells 9 through 14.
When the cell was occupied, the regulations required that the light be on.
We kept the lights off when they were in there. They were in the dark.
Well, when I'd go in the hole, what I used to do was I'd tear a button off my coveralls. I'd flip it up in the air, and I'd turn around in circles. Then I'd get down on my hands and knees, and I'd hunt for that button. And when I found the button, I'd stand up, and I'd do it again.
But if you would close your eyes, like right now, close your eyes and seal your eyes up with your hand, with a little concentration, you can see a light. And pretty soon that light will get brighter. And you got to concentrate on this. And after a while, or not a short while, this takes time and practice, but pretty soon you can almost put your own TV there. And you can see things. And you can go on trips. And this is what I did.
This was the prison library. You put your request on a library card. If the book was available, they'd bring it and put it in the bars for you. Prisoners with reading privileges could subscribe to approved magazines.
And if it had some story about some convict out of Nebraska or something that was cut out, never mind that you might have been reading a serial and it was on the back of one of them pages.
Prisoners who behaved could also take correspondence courses.
Took a course from the University of Pennsylvania on animal husbandry. The gestation period for a pig is 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days.
I used to do a lot of oil paintings on Alcatraz. If I was painting a scene of the Swiss Alps or something like that, hey, I'm right up there skiing as I'm painting, and I used to skate that way.
My grandmother taught me how to crochet when I was a kid. So I taught a lot of guys how to crochet. Big tough guys sitting in there with a needle and crocheting.
At nighttime, between 6:30 and 7:30, they have what they call the music hour. They play harmonicas or a guitar or whatnot. They had one guy over there, and he used to play one of these slide trombones.
Look up at the windows. They face San Francisco and the setting sun.
The yacht club, which was directly across from the island, would always have a big New Year's party. If the wind was blowing from that direction to the rock, you could actually hear people laughing, you could hear music, you could hear girls laughing, you could hear all the sounds that were coming from the free world at the rock. But New Year's was always the night we heard it.
Look for 4 small windows in the wall on the right. They're marked visitation.
And I walked up there, and here's this good-looking girl. I knew who she was when I got a real good look at her, and when she said Jimmy, which was what she always called me, so I knew it was my sis.
Once I saw Jimmy, it was, he didn't look different, and he was overwhelmed, and he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it, that we were there, and that I had grown up, and that I'd come to see him.
Uniform was prison gray with a hat.
I wore a hat all the time.
Regular double-breasted uniform.
And they used to call you red ties, because everybody in the place had this red tie on.
I carried a sap. We weren't supposed to, but many of us did. When you got done work, you just run down, catch the next boat, and you're in San Francisco in 12 minutes.
We all worked together. We all played together. We had 2 bowling alleys where we had bowling leagues.
We never locked our doors or anything on the island. Never.
You couldn't beat Alcatraz, but the beautiful view there.
So there was never a day you didn't see what the hell you were losing and what you were missing, It was all there for you to see. There's life. There's everything I want in my life, and it's there. It's a mile or a mile and a half away, and yet I can't get to it.
I recall getting in that water, and it was like a shock. I didn't expect it to be that cold. If you can do it, it's up to you. But you got to pay the price.
When they heard the escape siren, every officer on the island rushed here to report for duty. 3 men were missing from the cell house.
The inmates are supposed to be dressed and up, standing in front of their doors for count. Bill, there's a guy up here, I can't get up. And he was laying in there, so I reached in through the bars and I hit the pillow. The Lord knows what happened. The head fell off on the floor.
Prisoners Frank Lee Morris and two brothers, John and Clarence Mainland, had escaped the night before. They made dummy heads to fool the officers. According to the reports, the men enlarged the vent openings in the back of their cells. The three men climbed up these pipes to the roof. The men have never been found. At the end of 3 decades, over 1,500 men had served time on the rock. By then, Alcatraz had served its own time. After years of harsh wind and weather, the buildings were badly deteriorated. The isolated island was too expensive to run. Goodbye, and thank you for visiting Alcatraz.